This year we were very pleased again to be exhibiting at the Annual Conference and Exhibition of the CIPD. We had our comic book themed stand and several hundred people came and saw us over the 2 days. And I was also invited to make a presentation this year on the theme of the kind of conflict that can arise in change situations. We had quite a few people asking to rerun my presentation, and I'm very pleased to do it here for you. So if you did miss it at CIPD, here's a second chance. I was talking about change management and how change management can lead to conflict, and in particular how we can turn the resistance that people have to change into a better sense of collaboration, using the techniques and the skills of mediation to actually get people to have a good dialogue, talk about what concerns them with regard to the change management, and get them working together again under the new changed situation. So in this brief presentation, what I want to do is to talk to you about, first of all, how people have this resistance to change, what it is about change that causes us to be resistant, and also to talk about how that change can lead to relationship breakdown. What's needed in order to mend the relationships that can suffer as a result of change or reorganisation. And in particular, I want to talk about the value of giving people a good listening to, the value of having a productive conversation between colleagues so that they can get back on board again, and then talking about having a behavioural plan or a deal between colleagues who can come into conflict, but then how we can get them back on board with having a future focused plan for how they're going to conduct their relationship differently. And then talking about applying mediation skills. So the gist of the talk is about how we can use the skills of mediation to bring about a better sense of collaboration between people who have otherwise fallen out because everything around them has changed. So first of all, let's talk about this idea of resistance to change. So I think as a species at work, we prefer a situation where it's more predictable. So we know what our jobs are and we've got a fairly fixed idea or schema about what our job actually consists of. We want to know who we report to, who we go to for support, who's going to be our manager in essence, or supervisor, and where we're heading. We want to know our general trajectory, both from week to week, month to month, but also a bigger sense of a trajectory about where we're heading in terms of our career over a longer time scale. And these are the things that we enjoy as aspects of the predictability as a species at work. And I think we have some resistance to change, and it can tend to lead to conflict when we get a restructure, so that we have a change in our duties or in our hours or even the location of our work, or when we have a reconfiguration of a job, especially in terms of who we report to and sometimes who they report to. And also we can have problems with change if our jobs are redesigned in the sense of us being either overworked where we burn out or underworked where we rust out. So the sense of either being stretched too tight or actually not being stretched tightly enough. So those aspects of change can lead to conflict. And what I'm going to do now is to illustrate a sort of a conflict situation in an environment of change by looking at an office where we have two colleagues, Sally and Heather, who fall out because of some aspects of the change that happens around them. So there's a written and spoken preamble to the video just to set the situation up, and then you'll see how the change situation is impacting on Sally and Heather.
Sally and Heather work together in the accounts department of Connors Plumbing Supplies. Heather has been in her role for some years, while Sally has only recently joined the department following a reshuffle. There is some bad feeling from Heather over Sally's appointment, with Heather claiming that Sally only got the job because of her friendship with James, the departmental manager. Sally and James had worked together over a number of years before the current reshuffle. Sally claims, in return, that Heather over-scrutinises her work and her timekeeping and is cold and unfriendly with her. The two have quite different approaches to work, and this has begun to cause some tension. James has no issue with the two of them getting the job done, but has needed to speak to them separately about the importance of getting on together. They continue to rub each other up the wrong way, and there is often an atmosphere in the office. It is Tuesday morning, a few days before the deadline for an important report to be completed, and Sally is on the phone to her friend.
Hey Liz, yeah, it's nice to talk to you. Yeah, I was just ringing to find out what time we're going to meet for the theatre on Tuesday. Yeah. We go for about 1:30. Perfect. Yeah, it'd be fantastic to see you then. Oh, actually, do you want to go for a coffee first? That would be great.
Oh, for God's sake, it's not like it's even dinner time or anything.
Yeah, 1:30, Liz. Yeah, that'll be absolutely fine. Okay. All right. Bye. What are you doing at the weekend?
Nothing special.
Oh, we're going out with Phil. It's his birthday. Do you know Phil from sales?
Yeah.
It's his 50th. Would you like to come along?
No, it's alright. It's not really my kind of thing.
Oh, it's his 50. You should really enjoy yourself. Come on, you're fantastic time if you come.
Look, I said no, I don't want to go. We've got this important report to get finished. Perhaps we should be getting on with that instead of organising our social life.
Well,
So there we have Sally and Heather in the office, clearly not getting on, it clearly being to do with aspects of the changed situation around them. So from Sally's point of view, she wants to be welcomed into the department, she wants Heather's help in order to do the job well. From Heather's point of view, Sally can't do the job, she only got there because of friendship with James. Now the two of them are working on this level. Heather feels as if her empire is being invaded, Sally feels as if she's been made very unwelcome, and then there are issues to do with how their personal habits impact on one another. So let's ask a couple of questions about this. So is the change challenging to them both? And clearly there are aspects of their conduct, their behaviour that are impacting on one another as not necessarily a direct consequence of the change, but of the fact that they've been thrown in together and are having to work on desks where they're sitting opposite each other. And what are the symptoms of this? Well, the symptoms of this seem to be attention to one another's personal habits, about the time they spend on the phone, about Heather using her headphones, about Heather's manner towards Sally, which clearly rubs Sally up the wrong way, and so on. So between the two of them, these minor behavioural tics, these little habits of how they conduct themselves in their words and behaviours are causing an issue for one another. So let's move this on then and think about where this could lead. There's potential here for a confrontation between the two. So let's have a look how it develops between Sally and Heather, and in particular one morning when Sally's on the phone and Heather comes to chase her about a piece of work.
oh, has she had a second baby yet? Oh, that's lovely. She had a little boy. What's she called him? Oh, that's really nice. Hold on a minute.
Sorry to interrupt. How's your part of the report going?
Yeah, getting it done.
Do you think you'll have it done by tonight? Only I've got mine finished and I need to work yours into it.
By tomorrow. Yes, hi Ruth. Sorry for the interruption.
Sorry, Sally, I've not finished.
Sorry Ruth, I'll have to ring you back.
You've been on the phone for nearly 20 minutes. You could be doing your report then.
I'm
Before
on the
that, you
phone
had a break.
to Ruth from Albright.
Well, it doesn't sound like it. You was on for at least 20 minutes and before that having a break.
Is that right? That's the crux of it, isn't it? You are constantly monitoring when I go for my break. You think you're in charge, well you're not. You're always evaluating what I'm doing and timing when I have my breaks. I've had enough of it.
No, I don't. You're just being bloody childish now. For God's sake, can you just get your part of the work done? I've had enough of this. You're an absolute nightmare. I'm going to have to speak to James.
So there we have it. Clearly the thing has blown up into a bigger confrontation and Heather's run off to see the manager to go and report Sally's conduct to the manager. So there's clearly this relationship breakdown that's due to the restructure. What we're seeing there is a fairly common situation. And the question that I would ask as a mediator is, what do the people need? First thing I think they would need is to know what's a given and what isn't. They're not going to, through any process of dialogue or facilitated conversation or mediation, they're not going to change the situation that they find themselves in, but they do need to get the relationship back on track. So there might be some need for the manager, who's just got involved now that Heather's gone storming off down the corridor, to actually put some boundaries down and to say what is a given and what isn't, what is amenable to discussion and what isn't amenable to discussion. And then I think from a mediation point of view, I think what the two of them need is a good listening to. They've clearly got things they need to say, get off their chests about the current situation, and the two of them need to be listened to, given a chance to talk this through and to get it out and actually have somebody to hear it from an impartial point of view. The second thing that they need then is to get together and have a productive conversation. The two of them need to get around the table with somebody facilitating that conversation and make a good dialogue happen between the two so that they can work this out. As clearly when we see on those film clips, there's a conversation that's overdue. And thirdly, what they need to come up with at the end of that conversation is more than a chat. It needs to produce something. And at the conclusion of the conversation that they're going to have, we want them to come up with a behavioural plan or a deal about how they're going to conduct themselves differently. So first of all, let's take a look at the good listening to aspect of that. From a mediator's point of view, the listening that the two of them need to have, it has to be non-judgmental, it has to be active. It needs to be a process of actually empathic listening, of actually not arbitrating, not tell people who's right or wrong, not telling people what they have to do, but just a sense of letting them offload and have the listener take this role as an active, concerned, empathic party who can just hear what they've got to say. The second aspect of the good listening to is that empathy. So it's about attention to facts and feelings as well. So it's not just an information exchange, it's actually the practitioner hearing the emotional content of what's going on for the two parties. We're not trying to be therapists, but we do need to pay attention to the emotional aspect of their experience as well as to the supposedly factual aspect of their experience. And the third element of the good listening to as well is about the impartiality of that practitioner, actually not taking sides, taking their concerns on board, but without necessarily agreeing with anybody and certainly without taking sides in terms of who's right and wrong, who's to blame, who's at fault. So those would be the strands of a good listening to. And what I want to do now is to illustrate that with a process that's drawn from this film, which is made about a mediation between Heather and Sally. We're just going to see small elements of it. And the first thing that we'll see is Sally on her own in the privacy of an individual meeting where there's an understanding about the confidentiality and about the purpose of the meeting. We see Sally offloading and a very short clip of the practitioner who looks incredibly like me, giving Sally a good listening to.
She goes on and on about this. If it's done 10 times a day, she's asked for that flaming report. I told her it would be done the next day, and I said that again and said, can you leave it for now? Because I was on the phone. But she wouldn't. She sort of went on again. And then she just lay off, leave it. And she went mad. And she began calling me names. She called me a nightmare and that I was bloody childish. Well, to be honest, she's bloody childish.
Okay. So it sounds like it goes back to the time that you've come into the department from your point of view, you know, right back then.
Yes.
You know, you didn't feel particularly welcomed in, and you didn't feel as if...
I was welcomed, obviously, by the manager and felt that I was looking forward to the role.
Sure. Okay. And as though, you know, you weren't allowed to sort of prove yourself and show that you could actually do the job.
That's, yeah.
You felt as if Heather was sort of not allowing you that space or wasn't really... sort of moving over so that you could find your place.
Most definitely. She made it very clear from the first moment that she didn't want me there.
Yeah, okay. And you're frustrated about that, and
very frustrated.
And you know, it's been difficult right up until this point, where now, by the sound of it, your sort of working style clashes with your colleagues. And now, in the spirit of impartiality, it's Heather's chance to have a good listening to.
You know, and then if not, she's trying to make conversation and just totally disturbing me. Is it any wonder I've got to have my headphones in all the time? You know, you can't concentrate when someone's constantly popping up over the computer screen trying to get your attention.
Okay. So some of the things you're wanting changed are, you know, you need a quieter working environment, you want to be able to concentrate, you want to have a better deal about how much conversation goes on in the office. You're concerned, and I can hear your irritation about, you know, all of these different ways that you work. Really, you and Sally have got different styles quite clearly, and on top of that, you know, you're getting things coming back on the breeze about what Sally may have said to other colleagues, and you know, that's annoying to you as well.
It's not just colleagues, you know. There's a few clients as well that she's made snide comments about me.
Right. So there we have Heather's turn. So hopefully you'll notice some active listening skills. A sense of empathy where the practitioner tries to put himself in the shoes of each of the two parties, and a sense of impartiality. There's no sense of the practitioner taking sides. There's no sense of him saying who's right or who's wrong, or giving one a greater attention than the other, or giving one a greater level of concern than the other. So those are aspects of my number one, which is having a good listening to. Let's have a think about number two. This is about bringing the two parties together for a productive conversation. And let's have a think about what I mean by a productive conversation. So first of all, we're using reframing. This is a key part of the mediations repertoire. And in reframing, what we're doing is we're trying to make it future focused. We're more interested in talking about what's going to happen differently starting tomorrow than we are about arguing what's happened up until today. So the two parties, I always think, in a situation like this are not going to agree about the past, but what we may be able to get them to do is to agree about how to make a different future. How are you going to conduct yourselves differently starting tomorrow? So that's the first aspect of reframing, is about future focus. The second aspect of reframing is making it more about needs than positions. What we mean by that is positions is what people say has to happen. So Sally might say, you've got to induct me into this job more sympathetically. You've got to do this for me. You've got to do that for me. Heather might say, you've got to stop eating at the desk. You've got to stop making phone calls while I'm trying to work, etc. These are the positions we take. And quite often when we get into conflict, what we do is we lodge ourselves quite firmly into positions. We say what has to happen. It's because of our stereotype of conflict where there's got to be a winner and a loser. And if we can state our position and make sure our position gets satisfied, we have a sense of being a winner. So what we're trying to do in reframing is move away from that and get round to a productive discussion around what people's underlying needs and concerns or interests are, rather than just what their positions are. And the third aspect of reframing is about moving from a place of competition into a place of collaboration. So what I mean by that is in competition somebody wins, in collaboration both parties win. It sounds a little bit cheesy, but it's about making sure that we can have a good conversation so that both sides actually walk away from that conversation with more than they started. So we're going to have a look at a short section of the joint conversation between the two parties, now in the same room, and what we would allow them to do is to speak individually first, and then the practitioner would get the conversation going between them more directly. So we begin with Heather, who's going to be talking to the practitioner, me again, and we listen to some of the skills, some of the ways that I will try and reframe what Heather said, bearing in mind those three things. We're trying to get away from the sense of winning and losing and more into a place of collaboration. We want to get away from people's positions and more into their underlying needs and interests. And we want to have a sense of switching the focus to the future away from the past. You want to be able to put your hand on pieces of work that relate to the job that you're working on, etc.
I want all that, and I want her to stop constantly badgering me to have a conversation. You know, I'm there to work. I've got a job. I'm not there to make friends. I do have friends in departments, and we do have a chat when the work is done. You know, not for half an hour when I first get in, and then 20 minutes later go off on a break and have another chat. You know, she's forever popping her head over the computer to try and get my attention. I just can't concentrate. It was just so much better when I was working on my own, to be fair.
All right. So, Sally, thank you very much for your patience while we heard from Heather. And like I say, I'll ask Heather to be patient when we hear from you in a second. So just before we do that, Heather, from your point of view, you know, you want to be able to work without interruption. You want to have little disturbance. That's the way you work. There's a couple of things that need to be talked about with regard to eating at the desk, with regard to how Sally structures her working day in a manner that suits your working day. You want to be able to speak to Sally, get hold of her. You want to be able to get hold of pieces of work that might be on her desk, which from, you know, you describe as not as orderly as you would like it to be, or not as orderly as you would have your own workspace. And some stuff about, you know, how the two of you generally sort of relate in the office, how much chat there is, how much social contact there is, and how much work time there is. So there's some examples of reframing, and there's a lot missing from that, of course. And in the actual full-length feature, we had quite a few interruptions from Sally. We had a little bit of cross-talking, a little bit of hostility between the two parties, which the practitioner, of course, has to mediate. And then, in the spirit of treating them both equally, let's go on and hear from Sally. So Sally has her chance for a bit of uninterrupted time, and the practitioner again is going to try and hear that using reframing whilst maintaining order.
I want you to trust me. You know, if I've said the report is going to be done by tomorrow, then that's what I'm going to do. Not to keep going on and determining when she thinks it should be done and to her specification. You know, she needs to trust that I'm capable of doing it. James is quite trusting and knows that I work to a high standard. Why can't Heather accept that I am capable of doing the job?
Okay, so a few of the things you bring there, and thank you, Heather, for refraining so I could hear what Sally had to say at the end there. A few of the things there. You want to be trusted in the job.
Yeah.
You want to acknowledge that you're competent here, you can do the job. There are certain training needs, some things that are being addressed. Maybe that's something the two of you could discuss this afternoon about what you take away from this in terms of an action about that. And you're saying there's some understanding that you'd like Heather to have about your eating habits, about the fact that you need to to eat little but often. You're talking about how you would much prefer to have some social contact in the office, how you find it's difficult with the way Heather uses headphones and a screen, and perhaps again that's something else that the two of you could discuss.
I'd like to be a bit more sociable,
Okay. And you mentioned sociable outside of working hours as well? Yeah, okay. So there we have the application of a few mediation skills. We've given both parties a good listening to in private. We get them together in a joint meeting. We start it off by having some uninterrupted time for each of them, and then the mediator would get the conversation going between them more directly. We invite them to turn towards each other and to have more of a direct conversation. Incidentally, this is a film that we use on our accredited training course, so the full version is available there. And the third thing of my three things is about looking at this idea of a behavioural plan or deal. So we want their conversation to be productive, to actually have an output, and the output that we intend from these kind of conversations is some kind of a plan or a deal for what they're going to do differently. I say behavioural because behaviours are around what we do and what we say. So the structure of the department, the definitions of duties, the hours that they work, their terms and conditions are not going to change as a result of this conversation. The focus of this is around the interaction between them. It's around the degree of collaboration that they can improve upon. It's nothing to do with those other peripheral aspects of what goes on with their job design. So here in this third part with the behavioural plan or deal, what we're hoping to come up with is something that's entered into voluntarily, and this is on the presumption that when we make agreements voluntarily and from our own choice and our own volition, something that we come up with ourselves, we're more likely to try and make it work. I think we have this inherent resistance to change, but also an inherent resistance to being told what to do, and we tend to push back, particularly on more sensitive or heartfelt things, and we would be more resistant to being told how to behave as opposed to coming up with our own choices about how we might behave differently. So it needs to be entered into voluntarily. The second thing is we need to smart any actions, so we need them to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time orientated. That way we can make sure that they're going to happen. But also they need to be arrived at fairly. There needs to be a sense that the two parties have had a fair negotiation and have jointly, with equal weight and equal contribution, come up with this behavioural plan or a deal, and it's not been just one person calling all the shots. And the last thing is about it being only disclosed with consent. So if they choose to, they could keep their agreement private. It may be that they don't want the manager to hear about what they've agreed. What we do as mediators when we go into a structured, explicitly contracted mediation process is we will encourage parties to let the manager know what the outcome is, and they may choose to write it in a way that's not too disclosing or doesn't feel as if they've breached the confidentiality of their session. But it can be helpful for the manager to know what's agreed, but ultimately it's down to the parties themselves as to what gets disclosed. And right at the end there, we would follow this up. So after we've got that deal, after it's been reached voluntarily, after we've got this sense of it being arrived at fairly and it's got smart objectives, we follow it up after about 6 weeks just to check whether things have worked. We do that discreetly by email just to see whether the agreement has held up and whether there's any need for any further intervention. So that's the third bit really about the behavioural plan or deal. So I'm talking about when this process of change takes place and it gives rise to conflict, interpersonal conflict between parties. What people need is a good listening to. What people need is to have a better conversation, and what they need is to come up with a behavioural plan or deal that they've entered into voluntarily, that they've come up with themselves, that they choose whether to disclose or not, and that then can structure how better they interact with each other. So coming towards the end then, I want to just summarise that by saying that change can lead to negative conflict, but if we can manage that conflict well, what we have found is that well-managed conflict can then lead to more positive behavioural change. So that's my presentation from the CIPD exhibition this year, 2019. So I hope that's helpful for you, and especially for those people who came up to us or who got in touch and said they'd missed it. So this is your chance to see the presentation that you didn't see on the day. If you've enjoyed that, I would hope that you might join us again for some more content. A good way to do that is to sign up for our webinars. Webinars usually take place on Fridays at 12 o'clock. You're very welcome to join us for one of those, where we cover topics all to do with how we think about conflict at UK Mediation. So if you miss it live on a Friday at 12 noon, you can always find them on YouTube. We have a whole collection of webinars on there. So thank you very much for your attention today. We look forward to working with you again in the future.